Hello, hello, everyone out there. So we are going to be hopping back into the Iliad, the ancient Greek world, and see what's going on there. As you always know, we got to get into the review. So what happened last time? So Andromache, which was Hector's wife, she is super concerned about that Hector is not going to be able to get into the afterlife or the underworld, which requires a proper burial, at least according to the ancient Greek and Trojan world. Achilles decides finally to cremate Patroclus so that he can actually get into the underworld, because I guess Patroclus came to him in a dream or something like that. After that, Achilles threw his funeral games for all the fellow Greeks. This is kind of what happened back in the days, and basically offered his own riches as prizes for the winners in these different games. The games that they had, they battled it out in chariot racing, boxing, wrestling, foot racing. If you remember, they throw in spears, almost killed each other. I mean, this is craziness. Now, Achilles, at the end of this chapter, if you recall, he's still just distraught. This guy is ruined. But he decides to drag Hector's body some more. Not just a little bit, but 12 times, 12 days straight around Patroclus' grave mound, or where basically his ashes were. Apollo wasn't happy. He protects Hector's body so it doesn't actually get destroyed or dirtied or anything. And the gods are now finally saying, this has got to end. I mean, Achilles, I know he's angry, but this is just too much. So let us get into this chapter now and see what it's all about, called Ransom for Hector. Here's the image. The gods sent for the lady Thetis and bade her go tell her son that Zeus and all the gods of Olympus grew angry with him for his treatment of Hector's body, and that he must give it back to Priam, his father, for the honorable ransom which the old king would pay. So the gods are like, this is done. Get moving, give that body back. And Achilles listened to his mother when she came beside him, her words reaching him through his grief as no one else's could have done. At the same time, the gods sent Iris, the lady of the rainbow, who often acted as their messenger, to Priam, where he sat grieving in his palace with the dust and ashes of mourning on his head. So you can imagine Hector's father, Priam, is just, his son is dead. It's just such a sad and horrific thing for him. They bade her tell him that now he should go to Achilles and offer the proper ransom for his son's body, telling him also that if he did so, Achilles would actually listen to him. The old king went to his treasury and opened his chest of carved and scented wood, and brought out 12 fine robes and 12 white mantles and richly embroidered tunics, so just beautiful clothing. 10 bars of yellow gold he added to the pile. I mean, a bar of gold, you're talking like today would be hundreds of thousands of dollars probably in total for all these bars. And gleaming cauldrons and a beautiful golden cup, the pride of his heart, which had been given to him by the people of Thrace, another land. Then he called for his remaining sons, Paris and Deiphobus and the rest, and railing at them in his grief for being still alive when Hector was dead. He bade them make ready a wagon and load the ransom into it. So basically, ransom, I'm going to give you all this stuff, you give me back what I want, which is my son's body. And when they had yoked the mules and loaded in the treasure as he bade them, he prayed and poured wine to the gods and mounted into his chariot, which had also been made ready for him. Alone, save or alone for the drivers and a herald or messenger, he drove out through the Scaean gate and away over the plain in the darkness toward the ships. I'll show you the picture in a moment on this one. But unknown to him, the god Hermes, lord of wayfaring, went with him, and with his winged rod cast sleep into the eyes of all who looked that way, so that no man saw them pass, the old king in his chariot and the piled treasure wagon. So they passed unchallenged through the camp until they reached the reed-thatched hall of Achilles. You imagine if he had just gone out there with all that gold and riches, there might be somebody who might just attack that chariot or that wagon and steal all of that. So they reached the hall of Achilles, right? Priam got down from the chariot and went in. And while Achilles' men set about unloading the wagon, and the god was on his own way back to Olympus. Achilles was in his hall, surrounded by his companions with the remains of supper in their midst. The old king went in and knelt down at the prince's feet. So you've got a king kneeling at the feet. That's a sign of kind of submission or just respect generally. And he took and kissed his hands according to the custom. Hands that seemed to him crimson and terrible with the death of so many of his sons besides the beloved Hector. Can you imagine you getting down on your knees and kissing the hands of the man who killed your son, basically, or the one who's dragging your son's body around? That's tough. Have pity on me and listen to the word of the gods and give me back my dead son, he begged. Think of your own father, who is old and grieving, even as I, though for him there is still hope of his living son return. Have pity on me. For my son's sake, I have done what I did not think possible and kissed the hands that slew him and his brothers. And Achilles thought of his own father far away, who was indeed old, and who he knew would soon have as good a cause as Priam for his grieving. He raised the old king from his knees and spoke kindly to him, and they wept, both of them together, Priam for his son, and Achilles for his father, and for Patroclus his friend. So they're kind of sharing in the sadness of just death. Then Achilles bade the women make Hector's body ready for burial and cover him with a white mantle, the finest that his father had brought in the treasure wagon. And when that was done, and Hector's body laid in the now empty wagon, he sent for more food and wine, and he and the old king ate and drank together, before Priam set out with the ransom body of his son, back across the dark plain to the waiting city of Troy. All the people of the city came to meet them in the gate, lamenting and crying out for Hector. They carried his body into his own house and laid it on the bed in the high chamber. The women gathered round, keening for him, singing the death songs, tearing their bright hair. They're so sad. I'm going to show you this image now. Andromache led the lament, sitting at the head of the bed and holding Hector's head between her hands. My husband, you are gone from life too young, leaving me a widow in your house and your son without a father. You did not die in your bed holding out your hands to me, or speaking me some last word that I could remember through all the nights and days of the long years that I must weep for you. Then Hecuba, his mother, took up the lament. Hector, dearest to me by far of all my sons, when you were alive, you were beloved of the gods, and surely they will love you still, for they have allowed you no mark nor blemish to show how you were dragged behind your slayer's chariot wheels. Save for the one red flower of your death wound, you lie as though you slept. So after all that dragging, because the gods kind of took care of Hector's body, it's like a perfectly fine body, except for where that one wound killed him. Then rose Helen, the third to lead their lamentations, dark-robed and with white arms upflung. Hector, nearest to my heart of all the brothers of my husband's house, in all the years since he brought me here, would that I had died before those years began. Never did I hear a word from you that was bitter or ungentle. And when others upbraided me, or kind of like made nasty remarks towards me, for my ill doing, you would restrain and hold yourself back with your kind heart and gentle words. Oh, woe to me! Woe to me, for there is no one now in all Troy to stand my friend. Then Priam, the king, bade the people yoke up the oxen and fetch wood for a funeral pyre, telling them that they need fear no Greek attack while they do so, for Achilles had granted 11 days' truce while they buried Hector. So a truce means no fighting on either side. So they went out with their ox carts, and for 9 days they brought in wood and built a great pyre outside the city walls. And on the 10th day they laid Hector's body on the crest of it, and plunged torches deep into its heart. So you can imagine all this wood stacked high. And then a pyre can either be flat or it can be like whoosh, like a triangle of just wood. They put his body on it. And when the fire sank, they took the ashes and charred bones and wrapped them in fine purple cloth, weeping all the while. If you're familiar with purple, again, at this time in the world, the color purple, to make that color, it took riches. It was expensive. So purple is like, it's almost like if you think of gold today, purple, that color was as important as gold. They put them in a golden box and laid the box in a chamber hallowed in the earth, and covered it with stones and piled a grave mound over it in haste, keeping lookouts on all sides, for the 11 days of peace were almost up. Then they went back into the city and held a great feast according to their proper custom. Such was the burial that they gave to Hector, tamer of horses. You can see the picture up there, wherever I put it, is the last picture on this page of a horse. So that's it for this chapter. The next one looks like it's going to be called The Luck of Troy. So before we get into that next week, I just want to ask you a question and then a face. So how do you think it's possible, if you were the father of somebody who was killed, how do you go to the person who either killed him or like really just made a wreck of his body, just dishonored your son? How do you go to them and go on your knees and kiss their hands? Like, what allows you to do that? Or are you like, I would never do that? Like, what do you feel about that? Okay. And then the other face I want you to do is I want you to be King Priam kneeling with Achilles by the body and crying together. So that's the face. Again, you're going to be King Priam. That is mine. I hope you got a good look at it. It's a little bit dark on the screen, I can see today. So all my best to you guys out there. Hope you're doing well in these kind of crazy times in our own world today. I hope you're getting your own feelings out and talking about what's going on with all of that. Again, it's June 8th, Monday, June 8th, 2020. So if you're aware of the times, you're watching this years from now, you're like, well, what happened back then? Go Google it. Go Google it and see what was going on. All right. My best to everyone out there, regardless of your color, where you're from, who your mother is, who your father is. I really don't care. Or what country you're from, I really don't care. All my best. Adios, guys.